Thanks for joining me again here on Hampton Lake Homestead. I thought I would leave the garden and all my harvesting and work in the Three Sisters beds long enough to get started planting some brassicas. And that's what I'm going to be doing today. I've already planted broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts, and I'm now working on cabbage. I'm actually down to my last tray. Now I want to point out it's actually mid-June, and generally you want to start brassicas 12 weeks before you actually put them in the ground. That's why I'm doing it now, so that by mid-September, it will be ready to go into the ground. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about today is seed starting mix. It's very simple to just go and buy a pre-packaged, pre-mixed seed starting mix that's already sterile, but it costs more. What I typically do is buy the different components in bulk and mix them together and sterilize them myself. And I want to show each of those processes in today's video. So let's get started. First step in doing your own potting mix is getting some water boiling. In this case, I'm using 5 quarts. I have 5 quarts in here, which is going to be poured into a half of a 5-gallon bucket, which usually works out to be about right. Now, while the water's boiling, I'm going to mix 4 parts peat moss to 1 part vermiculite. It's not required that these particular ones be used. Leaf mold makes a free substitute for peat moss if you have plenty, and instead of vermiculite, many people use perlite. Either one is okay. And you'll see different ratios used. I typically use 4 parts to 1. So all that I do is just use a cup as my part, fill it up with, starting with the peat moss, do that 4 times, and then I'll do 1 of the vermiculite, and then repeat until this 5-gallon bucket is roughly half full. And I do want to point out here that this is not high in nitrogen. Neither of these are a significant source of nitrogen. There's really no need to add compost to this at this point. For one thing, the seed coat of the seeds that you plant have all the nitrogen that the starting plant needs to get started. And then once they're a little taller, I'll be using a fish emulsion fertilizer to keep these going until I actually plant them in the garden. Now what I do add are, I'll usually add about 1/4 cup of these ground eggshells, and typically I'll also add 1/4 cup of banana peel, ground banana peels. I'm actually out of the banana peels though, but what I also have that's free is some homemade bone meal. What I did after doing some chicken stock is I left the bones boiling so that they boiled for 10 to 12 hours, and when they come out they're very fine and can be pulverized. This is what the eggshells look like. I use a food processor to get it real fine. And this bone meal gets even finer, except for the few fragments that are in there. Okay, my water is now boiling. I'm going to try to turn this so it can be seen. What you're doing is just going to pour this boiling water all throughout this soil. Then I just take a spade, a narrow spade, and I just stir it very thoroughly. And so this is sterilizing the soil. You want to get every bit of this soil so that it's good and moist. None of it should be dry. So I'm just going to finish pouring it in now. And just continue to stir. And another thing, if you have a lid for your 5-gallon bucket, you can also put that lid on it and shake it, and as long as you're holding the lid with your hands on both sides, you can even take this entire bucket and turn it upside down, and it also helps to distribute the water. So to fill these up, I usually start with a larger, firmer cup like these. These that you buy are very flimsy, and you can't scoop very well with them. So I'm trying to do this with one hand, but I just set the one down, and then just using the other one, I just scoop in like this. And then especially with the brassicas, try to get this where you can see what I'm doing. You want to pack this down. One of the ways that you help to prevent club root is by reducing airspace within the soil. And so you also, when you finally plant these in the grow beds, you want to do the same thing and pack the soil down. So I get it about like that. Put that back in the tray, and then I'll do that again 17 more times until I fill this tray. Okay, now I have everything that I need to get started with planting. Starting, of course, with my seeds. These come from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and are just a typical green cabbage. And then I have labels. These are just pieces of milk carton that have been cut off. I will label them with what I've planted and the date and put it within the tray. Another thing I have is this dibbler, and I've actually marked it right at 1/4 inch with a Sharpie, so that as I go along here, I can make holes that are 1/4 inch deep. Now, another thing that I have here is this small seed planter. For small, flatter seeds, the seeds are put in here, and then this top is put on it. There's a dial here where you can dial the aperture that's appropriate, and then by just holding this and tapping, the seeds come out one at a time. Now, in the case of brassicas, the seeds are round, and I find that using that device makes them roll out, and often I'll get way more seeds per hole than I want. So with these nice round seeds, I just take them in my hand and just with my fingers, just plant one seed per hole. And so with brassicas in particular, I find it easier to do it that way rather than using that little planter. Okay, so now I've got this tray angled, so hopefully it makes it easier to see what I'm doing. But again, you just go down about 1/4 inch, make 2 holes per each one of these pots. Okay, so now again, you just take the seeds in between your fingers and just drop them 1 seed per each hole. And there are 2 holes per each of these pots and 18 of them per tray. Just put a little bit of soil over each hole, just very simply cover each one up. And then once I finish doing these, this tray is going to be ready to go to the greenhouse. All right, and this soil is a little bit dry. So before I put it inside the shelves, I'm going to top water it just a little bit, just to get it moist with my sprayer before I take it inside. And I'll put in more water once we get inside the grow light shelves. Okay, and I found a spot for this tray to go. Just sliding it in, and you can see how close I have the lights to the soil. And the first thing that I planted were Brussels sprouts. Just wanted to show I'm already getting germination on the Brussels sprouts, so real happy to see that. Now what I want to do with this tray, again, since this media was a little bit dry, is I'm going to go ahead and bottom water this. And all that I do is run some water in the bottom so that it's about 1/4 inch deep, and then leave it. And the water will wick up through this growing media up to the seeds. So it's mid-June, and I'm getting all these started now, so that 3 months from now, mid-September, these will be going into the ground. And hopefully, if everything goes smoothly, I'll be having some fresh Brussels sprouts for Christmas and some cabbage for New Year's. Well, that's all I have for today. Thanks so much for watching.